Hello, everybody. It is bright and early on the West Coast on Monday, the 24th of February, 2025. There are going to be a lot of worried bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Elon Musk has told the U.S. federal workers to list their weekly accomplishments or resign. It's the same tactics he used with X, Twitter. One wonders whether it's going to be successful. He's also running referendums on X, his platform now, about whether all federal employees should be required to send short emails about what they accomplished last week. Some people don't think this is going to work out. There's a report in the Washington Post suggesting that government agencies are giving conflicting advice on Musk's email. And The Guardian has reported that Kash Patel has told FBI staff to ignore Musk's request. So it might be more bureaucratic confusion. I think that's the thought of my guest today. Andrew Cockburn has the cover story in Harper's this month about Trump-Musk's attempt to dismantle the bureaucracy. It's called Rage Against the Machine, and Andrew is joining us from Northern Virginia. Andrew, is there hysteria in the DC area? Is it justified?
I'd say yes, and to a certain extent, no. Certainly hysteria. It's very easy to run into people who've either just been fired from the federal bureaucracy themselves, or have a relative or neighbor or friends who have. So, it's very understandably, there is a lot of hysteria, is kind of a cruel word to use for it, panic maybe. I take the view, which is currently very unfashionable in my piece, that actually this is all overstated. People forget that Trump, a lot of what Trump's doing now, he tried last time with, in the end, singular lack of result. And my bet is actually on the, whatever you call it, the bureaucracy, the deep state, that they will wear him down. It's, for example, so much sort of wending through the courts. Take the example of the probationary workers. As you know, he's fired, or everyone who's on probation, in their first year in a civil service job, has been summarily dismissed. Well, that was appealed in the courts, and the judge said, well, he wasn't ruling on the merits of the case, or she wasn't rather, but the first had to go to the Federal Labor Relations Authority. That was the correct bureaucratic mechanism for this, to appeal that. They had just fired the Democratic head of that authority. That is under court appeal. It seems, just on the merits of the law, that appeal will be upheld. So then she will be reinstated. The judge will then rule that these dismissals were illegal, which they certainly were. Then it'll go back to the court, and then I think, I'm betting that actually, within a few months, all those workers, if they want to come back, can go back to their jobs. As I say, that's a currently very unfashionable, although people inside the administration, who I must say, many of whom are supportive of what Trump is doing, have told me that that's what they think will happen.
Andrew, in the piece, you write about, shall we say, the journalistic hysteria. You quote you quote Ed Luce from the FT, the Atlantic, the New York Times, of course.
Yeah.
All who are warning that Trump may take the next step and actually ignore the advice or the rules of the court. Have you given that much thought? I take your point on the court screwing up Trump's attempt to dismantle bureaucracy, but what's your take on whether or not he'll actually obey court orders?
Well, if he disobeys them, then it will eventually it will end up in the Supreme Court. Again, my bet is that the Supreme, probably with the exception of Alito and Thomas, I think they would. I don't think they'd put up with this. So then, if there is, there will be a constitutional crisis. My bet is that he would back down. I mean, they're not. Then he loses the. Even the Republican Congress won't go along with that. It's a possibility, but I think people aren't paying enough attention to the fact that it's a possibility that he, I think a probability that he wouldn't feel politically able to get away with that. And we have Musk, of course, sort of raging and screaming, and I don't know what happens. Maybe it's the ketamine kicking in, and waving chainsaws around.
Yeah, I mean, this chainsaw thing, especially in the context of Argentina, what do you make of it? Is it just insanity? Is it Trump's drug addiction? Is he mad, or does he know what he's doing?
Who? You mean Musk?
Sorry, Musk.
Yeah. Well, a certain level of eccentricity, to put it kindly, about that. I would say no. I think Musk is one tweet away from Trump deciding to call it a halt. As he starts to sink in the polls, which is just starting to happen. I think that I have never believed that this relationship will endure that long. And it's very significant, as you cited just now, that the other courtiers are starting to get restive, that Kash Patel telling the FBI workforce to ignore Musk's sort of demand for weekly reports. I think you're going to see more of that. Patel, Kennedy, and some of the rest of them just aren't going to. They will assert their authority more, and I think the reign of Musk will start to go away in the foreseeable future. I wouldn't put a time on it.
The long view is an interesting one, Andrew. Alongside your article, Harper's, which has, I think, been around for longer than any of us, 174 years,
yes,
ran a piece from 1936, from the March 1936 issue, by somebody called Marquis William Childs, on the bureaucratic sublime, which focuses on similar hysteria in Washington about FDR's federal state. So does this suggest that this is a recurring feature of Washington, D.C.? As you seem to suggest in Rage Against the Machine, this bureaucracy has, in a kind of Kafkaesque way, a mind of its own. It's impossible to demolish. Once, it's like Kafka's cockroach. Once you destroy one, another one appears.
Exactly right. I think that's it. The people have spent a lot of time talking about the personality of bureaucracies, and there is a collective personality there, and they are almost impossible to dislodge until you have a complete collapse of the state. Let me give you an interesting example. Well, it's a slightly different. I'm talking about corporate power. That I was reading an interview the other day with a former German general. I mean, the old interview. It was an interview with a guy who'd been an important German general in World War II, who'd been the liaison between Hitler and the tank industry. And he said the thing was, Hitler could never get the car companies, who were also the tank manufacturing companies, to actually turn over most of their production to tanks, because they wanted to preserve their car production facilities for to have a good market position after the war. I always thought that was very interesting. It just shows, even when someone has absolute power, far more than Trump has, how hard it is to move big institutions. And I think that's what we're going to see here. I mean, in a way, I hope I'm giving people hope, because everyone, there is a sort of end times atmosphere, certainly in Washington, at the moment. But I think it's overblown.
You also you have a bit of distance on this, which is, I think, healthy, because, as you say, there's a little too much hysteria these days. You talk about George Wallace's assault on pointy-headed bureaucrats. Is there something particularly American, Andrew, about, you're a Brit living in DC for many years, about American hostility to bureaucracy? Is bureaucracy in many American people's minds somehow un-American?
Yeah, you've got a good point there. More so than in Europe, where people have had bureaucracies for longer, I guess, that there is this, the cult of rugged individualism, and it's very easy to sort of play on that, to say, you're being moved about by the pointy-headed bureaucrats. I mean, it's a long tradition, like that old article that's in Harper's that you mentioned. But George Wallace really, and I quote David Graeber as, pointing to Wallace as the person who really started using that in modern times.
You say Wallace should be credited for, what Graeber says, Wallace should be credited for creating a national platform for a kind of right-wing populism. And
right.
Graeber always had good instincts on that.
And, it's been bipartisan. I mean, Wallace ran on that. Reagan did it big time, as I mentioned. Clinton did it, in this whole, Clinton and Al Gore, reinventing government. Clinton used to make rude remarks about the bureaucracy. So it's, and it's carried on ever since. So it's always a very it's a populist theme, and something the politicians have seized on. So that's why that's why what Trump is doing, or appears to be doing, is popular right now.
You write in the piece about some of the characters involved in this most recent assault on the bureaucracy. Russell Vought, you write about, and also the America First Policy Institute.
Sure.
Are these people any different, Andrew, in your mind, from previous crusaders against the bureaucratic state?
Essentially, no. I mean, they've obviously thought very deeply about it. I mean, Vought is a smart fellow, although but he's also kind of nutty. I quote out.
Yeah, you describe him as a key architect of Project 2025.
Yeah. I mean, they spent 4 years sort of brooding on this, and why actually Trump, the first, as I said, spends a lot of time in the piece talking about all the things that Trump tried the first time around, which really went nowhere in the end. They were meant to be cutting the deficit. The deficit exploded. They tried to control. They completely didn't control the FBI, which worked hard to undermine him throughout most of his 4 years. They didn't control the military. I mean, all their efforts to bring the bureaucracy to heel really failed. And these are certainly in Vaught's case, he had the same job last time. I mean, initially he was deputy director of OMB, then acting director, and eventually director. So he was either close to running or running the agency, which is the key agency of government. And, had all the same ideas, used to express the same ideas, used to try the same things, and it didn't work. So I don't really see why it should be so different this time. I mean, if you talk to the Trump people, and his political supporters, they all say, "Oh, well, Trump, it was Trump big failing first time was personnel. He didn't have the right personnel, and now he's got the people he really wants." But a lot of them were the same personnel, Vought particularly. I don't see, especially when you've got a sort of rather nutty character like Musk apparently calling the shots, I don't see why it's going to work. It's also, I thought it'd be better planned, actually. But, it's been so capricious, and so, sending these sort of young techno characters, the Doge bags, into the agencies, behaving in a very capricious and sort of ignorant way, really. So I'd say, again, that in sum, I don't think people should be quite as frightened as they are.
Well, we can sleep at night, maybe. Andrew, you also suggest that Trump world is ready for this, that it can digest it. It'll just become another feuding episode, part of the soap opera. Do you think that Trump is, you suggested this earlier, do you think Trump is ready to, so to speak, chainsaw Musk himself? And this is just part of his narrative. It's the way he operates. It's what the Apprentice was, firing people. So it just comes naturally to him, and Trump world will just readapt in a post-Musk, post-Doge world.
Yeah, I do. I mean, Trump is, there's really only room for one narcissist in this administration, and that's Donald Trump. Musk. Musk is a very potent figure, obviously, because he controls. Well, he's certainly got all this money. He terrifies the Congress because they feel that the Republican Congress, because they feel he could just dump a lot of money into a primary. What I think will happen is we're with the midterms. Most of the Republican Congress will, continues to the congressmen will stay in line because they're frightened of being primaried, which is the only threat to them because they're all in gerrymandered seats. But there's about 10 or 12 Republican seats that are swing seats that are in districts that, voted for Harris or particularly vulnerable for various reasons. And they'll probably lose those in the midterms. So Trump will lose the House come the midterms, is my bet. And then, then things will be very different.
Well, I hope you're right. You also write, and you wrote this piece at your inauguration, so you were writing it before the latest stuff about Ukraine. But when it comes to Ukraine, you say, and this is one of your areas of expertise, but history indicates that Trump will retreat in the face of inevitably fierce resistance from the military services and their allies in Congress and the press. It is more likely that Trump's promise to bring a swift end to the war in Ukraine through diplomacy will come to nothing. I'm not sure how you think about that now, Andrew.
Well,
hold on, let me just finish. John Simpson in the BBC now is describing 2025 as another year like 1989 or 1968. Others have come on the show saying the same thing. Have you been surprised with what's happened in Ukraine, or is this more just Trump chaos?
No, I will admit that I have been surprised, that that Trump has been more determined and has been quite prepared to say to talk to Putin. Given that, and so although I'm defiantly defending the thesis of my piece, I will say that in this, I may well have been wrong. On the other hand, it's all very well to say, okay, Trump's made the deal with Putin and they're going to, abandon the Ukrainians. But is he really prepared to give Putin what Putin wants, which is, an emasculated Ukraine, demilitarized, not a member of NATO? Well, that's not going to happen. That never was going to happen. Again, I'm not prepared to say quite, I was completely wrong. I mean, it may be that Trump will triumph here, and Mr. Witkoff will get the Nobel Prize or whatever. But we're not there yet. Again, I think we should wait and see.
What did you make of J.D. Vance's speeches, particularly in Munich, but also in Paris, about AI? Is he in a sense, a more reliable voice of the new Trump administration than Musk?
Yeah, he's the more articulate one, and in many ways a smarter one. And I thought it was it was his lectures to the Europeans, were obviously designed for the domestic audience. I mean, basically, anti-DEI. His very selective citation of various censorships that's going on in Europe. I mean, certainly didn't mention the most egregious kind of censorship, which is anyone who speaks up for the Palestinians in Germany is liable to jail, get arrested, to a certain extent in Britain too. I think that was, Vance is a very formidable character, I think, but also more, probably more flexible. He's changed his positions on pretty much everything, so including on the topic of Donald Trump so much. It's we'll see what happens.
Were you? I mean, you've been around a while, Andrew, a keen observer of American foreign policy, of all its disasters of one kind or another. Were you morally outraged by Trump's insistence that the Ukrainians were at fault for the Russian invasion?
I wouldn't say morally outraged. I was pretty surprised. I thought it was kind of a, real hostage to fortune saying that. I mean, God knows what was going through his mind. May have been he's been listening to people, like Jeffrey Sachs or whatever, saying, really all goes back to 2014, if not earlier, and that the coup, the overthrow of the certainly very flawed but still democratically elected president of Ukraine at that time, was the beginning of, is where all this started, and that the refusal to go along with the Minsk Accords and so forth. I suppose that may have been going through his addled brain, and that's why he said what he said. It's obviously a very stupid thing to say, but there we are.
One of the things I found particularly interesting about your Harper's piece was your observations about the real deep state being the contractor state, the way in which the state has already been essentially privatized.
Yeah.
How central is that in terms of the inability of anyone, Trump, Doge, Project 2025, whoever they are, to actually destroy this state or undermine it?
I think it's very important. People don't realize just how, how much the degree to which the government has been privatized. It's been going on for a while, but really exploded in the Clinton years with Al Gore's, so-called reinvention of government. And that makes it that much harder when you've got so many people with, certainly in the military, but across the board. As I say, even the Department of Justice has subcontracted a lot of its functions. It makes it much harder to, you can't willy-nilly just cancel a contract. Certainly, the courts don't look very kindly on that. So you say, well, Trump could have, ignore the law. He said, if he starts to just, just to cancel contracts, that's, a very legally difficult thing to do. So, and I think that's one of the reasons that, there will be not a fundamental overhaul of government like we're being promised or threatened at the moment. And I think, I think it's very unfortunate that so much of it has been privatized. Look at the USAID. A huge portion of the USAID money was actually going to private companies. And a lot of that money was indeed never leaving Washington, D.C. I just noticed, they've been giving a $2 billion contract to something I'd never heard of called Chemonics, which was getting $2 billion a year for capacity building, whatever that is. So we'll see what
The standard assumption is progressives should be outraged by all this, but you end the piece again in this very provocative way, Andrew, by suggesting that actually, in a way, you half regret the fact that the contractor state will probably survive Trump's onslaught. Do you think progressives need to rethink their identification with the state? Anytime it ever gets attacked, they should somehow defend it?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I do, in a way. Yeah, I mean, for instance, everyone's rushed to the defense of USAID, which was certainly doing a lot of good work. But if you look at its actual record, where the money's been going, and a huge amount of it has gone to basically the extension of US soft power. If it's worth going back and looking at the reports of the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, John Sobko, who's been he was put in by the Congress. He was put in charge of looking at where all the money was going in Afghanistan. And I've talked to him a lot about this. So much of it was going through the hands of USAID, which was basically being used to sort of prop up our favored warlords, or else being just sort of channeled back into the very capacious pockets of the contractors. I don't see why I should be required to defend that. I don't see why I should be required to defend money, so-called aid money, going to help sort of organize color revolutions around the place. I think there's progressives should rethink a bit about their sort of knee-jerk, just because it's Trump. Let's look at another example: the whole COVID lockdown, which really scarred a whole generation, particularly of school children, and that was the public health bureaucrats getting hold of the narrative, and getting progressive support, because it seemed to be opposition to Trump. I think progressives really ought to have a hard think about what it is they're actually defending, just because it's under assault by Trump.
You wrote an interesting thing, co-wrote in last August in The Spectator, about what the Democrats actually believe in. Big photo of Kamala Harris. She seems to be someone who believed in nothing, perhaps, apart from herself or her own narrative. Is there perhaps a real intellectual crisis now? Maybe not so much amongst progressives, Andrew, in America, but within the Democratic Party, about how they're supposed to deal with this. There was a big piece over the weekend in the New York Times about Senator Murphy, who from Connecticut, who has emerged as a clear voice for the Democrats countering Trump. But he's not exactly FDR. I mean, what is going on within the Democratic Party in the late winter, early spring of 2025?
It's very depressing. I went to the Democratic Party convention a couple of weeks ago in Washington, and actually in the same hotel where the CPAC, we've just had the right wing celebrating the Democrats. It was like very, even the speakers didn't seem to have their hearts in it. At one point, I remember the chairman, Mr. I forget his name now, Jamie Harrison, the outgoing chairman.
They're all pretty forgettable. I think that's one of the problems.
Yeah, and he said, but people were about to vote on who should be the candidates for vice chairman of the party, and he gave this long sort of rambling thing about how the rules required that there should be gender equality among the people among the candidates, among the people, the successful candidates, and people who were non-binary wouldn't count in that. And this was immediately picked up by the Republicans, who were quickly tweeted it. Oh God, we're sort of back in that. And then there was a depressing moment when the votes had been counted and Harrison said, and now everyone look at the video screens, and up popped Joe Biden.
Oh my God.
And then Kamala Harris, who said, there's a mighty struggle ahead and I will be with you every step of the way. I thought, oh no, that's, we're being asked to rally behind Kamala again. And just talking to the delegates, I felt there was no energy. It was like a sort of election for a garden club or something. I mean, maybe I'm sounding too cruel, but I felt, really, if the Constitution's under assault and, the democracy's at stake, and this was the opposition.
Well, maybe they'd all been reading you, Andrew. You say it's not too.
Yeah, no, but if that's what they were saying, but again, there was no. I just felt a sort of incredible lack of energy in the whole gathering. It was deeply depressing, and I think Democrats do need to. They're saying now the sort of, oh gosh, we have to find a way to talk to the working class. Well, yeah, but it wasn't clear to me what they proposed to say to the working class, apart from, you got people like Fetterman, who's a sort of the senator from Pennsylvania, who ran as a progressive and now seems to be emerging as a sort of quasi-Republican, who just sort of goes on TV and rants about woke. And I think if they think, oh, well, if we sort of if we just abandon woke, quote unquote, whatever that means, then we'll be okay and the white working class will rally to our side. I just feel there's a complete lack of ideas and a lack of energy. And
so Andrew, let's conclude. Where should that energy be? I mean, you talk about being half regretful about not being able to reform the state. Do Democrats themselves, maybe using new technology, there are innovators on the progressive side who think that AI, for example, can be used to reform the US state, make it less expensive and more functional. What are the areas of innovation for progressives? Where would you like to see the party go? Or do you want to just go back to Bernie Sanders, essentially?
No, Bernie, oh, God forbid. My basic sort of feeling is, we shouldn't, the Democrats that have been in power, they rethink about. Sorry, I have to articulate this. I haven't really been faced with this question, which I should have been thinking about more. I mean, well, I think they have to abandon their fealty to Israel. There, I've said it. I think a party that won't draw the line at genocide really has no right to talk about democracy. I think they have to not sort of. They certainly have to end their reliance on big money, on the corporations, where they've turned to more and more. They have to really, try and mobilize the grassroots in a way, talk to them all the time, which, as you probably know, I mean, every 4 years or every 2 years, the Democrats suddenly remember the grassroots, and suddenly you get a lot of mailers and demands we all go out and everyone go out and knock on doors. Whereas I find the Republicans, they talk to people all the time. They're much more, and regrettably in a way, but they're much more in touch with what people are thinking, what people want.
So I take that point. So what if the Dems did go out and talk to the people, as you're suggesting, what would they hear that would enable them to create a more innovative platform to reinventing America? Maybe not make America great again, because that one's been taken, but some other way of looking forward rather than backwards at the New Deal.
They would hear, that people really are very, very, very desperate. the statistic, the Democrats kept saying, what are people complaining about the economy for? Unemployment's at record low levels. Well, in fact, that's a very squishy statistic. And if you look at it another way, just looking at people who are just working a few hours a week, functional unemployment is actually about 25%. They should realize how badly off most, but a huge proportion of the population actually is. They should find a way of reining in the insurance companies who are.
Yeah, I mean, it's astonishing to me how the insurance issue hasn't been politicized yet. I think that is one area which will resonate with everybody, because everyone's experiencing now the absurd exploitation and hypocrisy of the insurance industry. I don't understand why no politician has not embraced that. Could almost run on that now.
Well, you certainly could, and that's a prime example. And the Democrats certainly won't mention that, or aren't mentioning that. The things that really, why is it, it's impossible to buy a house for so many people. So many young people, are faced with the prospect they'll never buy a house. People now have to rent. We're becoming a renting, housing economy, and which is controlled by, various huge corporations.
Yeah, we're doing a show tomorrow with Yoni Applebaum, who has a new book out about that.
Well, there you go. Yes,
housing
I know about that. That's excellent. The things like that. Well, those are two prime examples. The things that are really on people's minds, the real problems that people are facing, which are never addressed by the Democrats or anyone else. But
you sort of poo-pooed Bernie. He probably doesn't say anything that different. Is the problem not so much what Bernie is saying and the personality? I mean, AOC, does America need do the Dems need someone glamorous, someone sufficiently show busy enough to go up against Trump and his minions?
Someone who can strike a chord.
And that's not Chris Murphy, is it? That's for sure.
It's not Chris Murphy. It might be AOC, but it's like here in, well, I don't know how much time I got left, but here in Virginia, we're being completely overrun by big tech's data centers. And yet, because the tech companies have bought up all the lobbyists and most of the politicians in Richmond, nothing's been done about that. There's no regulation. We are all, my electricity bill has gone up is going up 3 times. Because we have to pay for the energy that's consumed by these data centers. No one's talking about that. That's something people feel very. There's a real popular movement to be ignited about that. It's I guess to give a short. I've been rambling in my answer to your question, but to give a short answer, the Democrats have to sort of divorce themselves from the corporate state. Because the corporations, the energy corporations, the insurance corporations, the housing, house owning corporations are absolutely screwing people, and someone needs to, deal with that.
And perhaps young people need to acquire a voice. I mean, that's the other thing that seems to be missing. Maybe not privately, but publicly, it's still a mostly gerontocratic debate. I mean, the fact that Biden appeared on your screen, the fact that Nancy Pelosi is still around is absurd.
It is absurd. And, the fundamental problem with the Democratic Party is the people who control it would much rather retain control of the party than actually, speak to the people, speak for the people. So, there was a struggle to get rid of Biden, if you remember, and Harris, but in where Bidenism was still in control. I mean, Harris didn't feel capable of saying, I might do something different. That is the fundamental problem with this party, that they, it is the people who control it aren't letting go and won't.
Well, that's a huge issue, one that we will review. Andrew, been on the show before. Andrew Cockburn, the author of a wonderful editorial or cover piece in the this month's Harper's, Rage Against the Machine, which is actually cautiously optimistic on Trump's attempt to destroy the state, although he's not entirely happy about that because he'd like to see the state reformed. Andrew, as always, an honor to have you on the show, and we'll do it again in the not too distant future. Thank you so